Today, you are going to show us how to make offers more competitive, aren't you?
Yes.
All right. That's awesome. All right. We have Heather here from Grace Group Realty. It is Brad, the mortgage guy, of course. And Heather is just going to share some tips with you all. So let's just jump right into it. How are we making offers appealing, right?
So important today because there's a whole lot of buyers and not usually a lot of inventory. So important to stand out.
And it's different than it was before. Like before it was like I'd go to you and I'd give you an offer and then you'd come back and we'd negotiate back and forth.
Right.
It's not really the way so much anymore.
Right. Usually there's more than one offer on the table. Yeah. So we really need to make sure that the offer that we're putting on paper is what we mean. And if we really want the house, then we're really going into it that way.
Yeah.
So of course the price that you're offering is probably one of the most important considerations.
Yeah, obviously. It doesn't always come just down to price. You're going to share a lot of other tips, I'm sure, but price is absolutely important.
Right. And so working with a realtor that's going to actually provide you comps that are going to support the price that you think you should be offering is super important.
Yeah.
From there, you may need to be comfortable going over the asking price. And then it's a question of how comfortable you are going over that asking price and by how much. And then from there, really speaking to your lender to understand what your monthly payment is going to be at that point.
Yeah. So that's real important. Buyers need to get comfortable going over that asking price, right? Your market is primarily probably greater Springfield area, Massachusetts, Western Mass, right? Like draw a big circle around that. That's where you're at. Super competitive in this market, right?
Yeah.
So it's important for agents to be able to provide those comps, but also it's important for them to be able to provide their experience and say, hey, listen, this is what the comps say, but here's where we think this is probably going to sell. And oftentimes it's over what those comps are looking at.
Exactly.
Right?
And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with buyers who have been looking for a while. They're not really finding a home that checks all the boxes. And when they do, I give them the advice to go over the asking price to a certain amount if they're comfortable going there.
Yeah.
And they have this magic figure in their head that they don't want to go over. And then they're really disappointed when down the road they hear that the home sold for $1,000 or $2,000 over what they were comfortable offering. So I think it's important for them to understand how much more they're actually spending per month if they were to go there.
Yeah. And that's important too. I'm glad you bring it up because a lot of people will come to me and they say, okay, here's what you're thinking of offering, but every $10,000 is going to cost you about, say, $70 per month, right? So that $10,000, now it might be a little bit less than that depending on how much they're putting down, what program they're in. There's a couple of different things, but let's say right now with where rates are at, about $70 per month for $10,000, which means $1,000 is only $7 a month, right? $2,000 is $14 a month. $3,000 is $21 a month. And I guess you'd ask the question, if you could have gotten this deal, would you have paid $21 more a month for that house? Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I'm getting at. In this market where there's a lot more buyers and not enough homes.
Okay.
So it's important to have a strong offer. Offer price is really important. Being prepared to go over the offer price, really important. And understanding that when you're going up in increments of, say, 1,000, how that's going to affect your monthly payment.
And it's pretty small, right? It's huge, but it's pretty small.
Yes, exactly. So, you don't want to be kicking yourself, 6 weeks down the road when you find out the home sold for $1,000 or $2,000 more than what you were willing to offer when, you break it down into how much it's actually going to translate monthly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have it in their head that, oh my gosh, I'm not paying more than $305 for this house. And then it's like, well, $307 would have done it. It would have cost you $14 more a month. Did you like that house or not, right? And then it's finally on the third or fourth house that they realize getting competitive on the price is one way that they've really got to sharpen their pencils.
Correct. But that's also part of the learning process too. So if you're doing this for the first time, you've never bought a home before, you almost kind of need to go through that to sort of understand the whole process and how it works so that when you find that home that really does check all the boxes, now you're more prepared and you're ready to go with both feet and feel confident.
All right. So price is not everything though, right? They're really looking at, the way I put it is this, is that you've got a lot of buyers out there that are coming in, they're trying to buy your house. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to shine those buyers up and make them as shiny and beautiful as possible for the seller to go, ooh, I like that one. That one looks really good. So deposit, for instance, how does a deposit make a buyer look stronger?
So as a seller, if I was coaching a seller, I would tell them that they want to go with a deposit that's strong because that's less risk at the end, right? So if you've got a buyer that is comfortable putting down a good amount, then that could be a stronger offer than someone else who's putting down zero or just a very minuscule amount of money at that point. They're not as serious about buying the home.
Okay, so deposit is one thing. Having a larger deposit actually reduces risk for a seller. How about down payment? Like, we'll get into loan programs here a little bit later, and I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but how about down payment? Does a seller care what you're putting down?
Absolutely. So, I mean, certainly if you're not in a position to put anything down, that's one thing. But most sellers, if they are educated by their realtor, which they're working with one, they're going to want to know really what all the pitfalls are here. And they want to pretty much eliminate the risk factor for themselves so that they don't want to get to the closing table to find out that it's not closing for whatever reason. So the job of a listing agent is really to prepare that seller, hopefully the smoothest transaction possible. So they're going to be advising to go with, whatever offer is strongest on all these different factors.
So looking at somebody's down payment, you might just assume somebody with a larger down payment is a little bit stronger. Now, what I will say from the lending side is that's not actually always the case. You actually could have somebody putting down, say, 20% because they're actually a weaker buyer and they have to put down 20%, whereas that VA buyer is really strong and they're at 100%. But that is something that people do consider.
Yes, it certainly is. At that point, if I was the VA buyer, I may actually go one step further and, add image of their bank account if they're comfortable with that without the number on there, just showing that they do have money if need be, but they qualify for this program and it's one that they kind of can't pass up because of the way it's structured.
Yeah, because it's such a strong program there.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So down payment can come into play. Yes. It could make people assume you're a stronger buyer. That may or may not be true. And I think that's all part of what a seller's agent has to do as well. And also a buyer's agent and their loan officer. I know for myself, I call listing agents to try to make sure that any questions that they might have are answered.
Yes.
For instance, I've had people with VA that are 100% financing go, listen, they've got the money, but this benefit is something they earned literally in blood and they earned it and they don't want to spend the money because it's not liquid, right?
Correct.
This is a super strong buyer. And so trying to convey that as a buyer's agent to a listing agent is certainly helpful. So, all right, so we have price, we have deposit, we have down payment. How about closing timeframes? You're talking about closing timeframes. How do these come into play?
So sometimes it's really important to, have your buyer's agent speak with the seller's agent and find out what's most important to the seller. Sometimes they're in a hurry.
Sure.
So sometimes if, you can meet a quick closing timeline because you've done all your homework with your lender ahead of time and you've checked a lot of the boxes throughout the process, you're going to close a lot quicker than someone else.
Yeah.
That seller may take that into account and you may actually end up getting the home for less money because now that seller doesn't have to pay those taxes because they're not going to own the home anymore. There's other expenses that they're not going to have to.
Okay, so a seller might say, I need to close fast. I'll give you just one example. I had an offer that got accepted that the realtor called me and said, hey, this person needs to close right away. Can you close in 10 days? And I said, yeah, let's do it. And they put in the offer and it was funny. The offer goes in. The attorney on the seller's side sent an email that said, this closing date is way too fast. There's no way the lender is going to be able to close this thing on time. And I was copied on this and I was a little insulted by that. And so I just replied back, hold my beer. And they were like, what? I was like, we'll be ready. Are you going to be ready? Because we'll be ready. So, and in fact, we were ready to close in 10 days.
Amazing.
So like that got the deal. But speed is important sometimes, but also you said it's important to communicate with the selling agent because they might not want to close fast either, right? Maybe
they might have a lot more, moving to do.
Sure.
There's a lot of coordinating that goes on.
Yeah.
So really communication is key.
Yeah.
And that's what your agent is doing for you. They're making sure that communication is happening. They're informing you and they're keeping everybody kind of on the same page throughout the process just to make it as smooth as possible. Yeah.
I had a contract come through last week that was for like a 75-day closing, which is like crazy right now. There's never a 75-day closing, but that seller actually, one of the reasons they took it is because our buyer was flexible. They were like, well, I'm living with family right now. If I close in 30 days or 75 days, no big deal. That seller wants to close in 75 days because I think they were moving south and they had a lot of prep to do. And that actually won the deal. So being fast, but also being slow, it's really about knowing what the seller wants and asking. So ask, right? Okay.
Every transaction is unique.
All right. So closing timeframes, big one. Let's talk about contingencies. We have inspection contingencies. What's happening with inspections right now?
So inspections for buyers are super important because, it really gives them sort of like a checklist or checkup on the home so that some things maybe don't need to be taken care of right now, but it's a good thing to have on hand so that down the road you can, check out that information.
And a budget for for it too.
Budget for it, but also, especially for a first-time home buyer, there's probably a lot of things going on here that you're not familiar with.
Sure.
So you want to make sure that, things don't get away from you and then you end up with big problems.
So budgeting too, like if there's repairs to be done in this house that are going to need it in the future, budgeting's super important, right?
Budgeting is important, but also, it's important for buyers to be informed if there's something major going on that they're not accounting for, to budget to fix in the future, or maybe to negotiate with that seller. But in this day and age, a lot of buyers are going in with inspections for information only, just because it's less stress on the seller and really, keeping the seller happy when it's really not a buyer's market is kind of the way to go if it's something that you're interested in.
All right. So then when they're doing that, what are they really saying to the seller? They're really saying, okay, we're going to do inspections, but we just want it for our own informational purposes. But as a buyer, that can be scary too, because can I back out at that point? If, like, let's say there's a major carrying beam and this house is falling down.
So they're not waiving the inspection.
Okay.
They're doing them for their information only.
Okay.
And so all of the inspection language is still in full force. So they are still entitled to their 10 days to inspect, and they can back out during those 10 days at any time for any reason. They get cold feet. It doesn't necessarily have to coincide with the inspection itself. However, usually when you write up inspections for information only, it gives the buyer the right to make sure that there's nothing majorly wrong going on there. And then you still have the opportunity to negotiate with the selling agent about something that majorly could have come up that the seller didn't know about.
Okay, so it sounds like it's more of a posturing thing where you're saying, hey, listen, we are going to still do inspections. We don't intend on coming and being nitpicky, but we want to make sure there's nothing major here.
Correct.
Am I right in saying that?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right, so important still to have. I know some people are waiving them completely, which...
I never feel comfortable with the buyer waiving inspections unless their father's a contractor and is willing to come in, do their own inspection, and they assure me that they know what's going on. And even then, I'm kind of like, you should probably just pay for the inspection. But, if they insist, I have a client that flips houses. That's how they do their business. They want to waive the inspection. They're comfortable doing it. That's okay. But I would never recommend it myself.
Got it. Okay. So it is something that's happening, but not an awesome idea from a buyer's perspective. Certainly a seller, I can see why they would love that. But from a buyer's perspective, I think diligence and having that posturing, knowing as a buyer that, hey, I'm doing this inspection and I'm not going to nitpick. I think that's important to convey to that seller, because when you're trying to get selected from those multiple offers, that's super important. All right, let's talk about appraisals. What can buyers do to make themselves more attractive concerning the appraised value of this property?
Right. So appraisals are important because depending on how much money they are putting down or financing will depend on whether the appraisal is super important or not. And in this day and age, most properties must hit the appraised value. Up front, they can actually say that they will pay over the appraised value up to a certain point. They're comfortable doing that. And if there's any doubt that the home won't appraise, if they really love the home and they want to buy it for a certain amount, and then that kind of eliminates the negotiation at that point where the appraisal doesn't hit the appraised value. And so for the seller, that's kind of like a sweetening point that they know that they're not going to have to hit that wall where the buyer could potentially back out of the transaction because the home did not appraise.
All right. So historically, it was really appraisal. The house has to appraise for the purchase price. If it didn't, people went back to the table and negotiated. So now they're basically saying, hey, I'm buying this house for $500, but if it only appraises at, say, $450, I'm still willing to buy your property. But if it appraises at $445, I have an out, or we're going to have to renegotiate, or we've already determined that we're going to pay a certain amount over that appraised value.
They'll pay a certain amnt over the appraised value, and it's usually up to a certain amount of money.
So this is
called an appraisal gap.
Appraisal gap. Okay. All right. And so what buyers are doing traditionally is they're literally coming with that extra $50,000 in that example to the table.
Correct. And sometimes even going so far as to show the $50,000 in an account that the seller realizes they do have the money.
Okay.
It's fluid and...
Yeah. And something that we offer buyers is actually appraisal gap insurance, to where we have some scenarios where if that $50,000 comes in short, we actually have insurance to where instead of coming up with $50,000, they might come up with $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 max and still have the same payments and still have the same cash out of pocket other than that extra fee. So that's something to talk about. That, I will say, is one of the big things that's winning offers right now.
Wow.
Is appraisal gaps, being able to do larger gaps by having that appraisal gap insurance in place to allow that. Why does that help? Well, I'm not educating you here. You already know this, but from a seller's perspective, perspective, they're getting offers well over asking, right? So what's their concern? Their concern is this house not going to appraise, and then we start all again.
4 to 6 weeks down the line, and then what's the market looking like then?
One strategy of buyer's agents out there that I've seen is they'll say, hey, we'll do an escalation clause, unlimited escalation clause, they say, meaning we'll take whatever your highest offer is out there, we're going to beat it by $5,000. We'll beat it by $10,000.
Right.
Most of the time when those buyers are doing that, what they won't do is they won't waive the appraisal. And all they're really saying is they're hoping that the seller's agent isn't smart enough, or the seller isn't smart enough to realize that what they're really doing is saying, hey, we'll give you whatever you want. I'll pay $1 million for your $300,000 house. But when that appraisal comes back and it's only $290,000, guess what? We're back to the negotiation tables.
Oh, so you're financing is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I've seen that out there, but appraisal gaps, though, take that risk away from the seller and say, okay, yeah, I know that you're paying more and maybe we won't appraise, but now you're offering to cover that gap. Exactly. Now I'm more comfortable. So that's a big win right there. Absolutely. Mortgage contingencies is another one that I'm seeing, so I can speak to that a little bit. What we are doing up front right now is doing what's called a power bid approval, which is basically a commitment. So we're actually getting the commitment up front as opposed to after the house. So somebody's coming in having 499 pieces of a 500 piece puzzle done, and they're saying, hey, I'm like cash. I'm a cash buyer. Cash says, here's my bank statement, right? I've got the money. This now says, here's my underwriting approval. I've got the money. There's no questions whatsoever. So taking away those contingencies, super important. So mortgage contingencies, another one. Let's talk about loan types. What are the favored loan types and why, would you say?
So I would say to a seller, conventional is number one, because it's your typical, they're looking at credit scores. They've got more money in the bank. They are typically putting a little bit more down than some of the other programs. And most importantly, the appraisal isn't as intrusive. So they're not looking for as many of the components that would be more like on a home inspection in the appraisal.
Okay.
It's more straightforward.
Okay.
There's not as many strings attached.
Government loans, then you have conventional, and then you have government, which is USDA, FHA, VA. You just brought up is that those appraisals have a little bit extra that they put into it. They look for some health and safety issues.
Yes.
I would say for this one that it's valid because there are things that can be done, but 90% of appraisals come back with no conditions on those government loans. So from a lender's perspective, sometimes we look, and this is hard to stomach sometimes, where we look at a buyer and we say, listen, FHA is better for you. You're going to have a lower payment. You're going to have a better deal. But if you really want to get your offers accepted, you should probably go conventional because that's what's winning right now. So I would like to interject in here that FHA government loans aren't so bad, right? That inspection isn't terrible, but you're right. There is potentially some stuff on top that could be done. Is there anything buyers can do to help mitigate that?
They can participate, certainly. So up front, if they're in a position to do so, for example, if a handrail needs to be installed or there's some peeling paint and they're handy and they want to do that, as long as the seller gives them permission to do the work, if it comes up and those are the conditions, then it's certainly something that can be negotiated, and they can say that they will take care of it of their own accord.
That's great. So numbers wise, about 30% nationally is actually government loans right now. 30% is cash, 30% is government, and then the rest is the rest, right?
Sure.
So I will tell you, most of my government offers that come in that get accepted, most of them are offering to do exactly what you just said, where they're saying, hey, I'll contribute, say, $2,000 to repair this stuff. Now, if a seller has a house that's just like totally buttoned up, like it really takes away a little bit of that risk, right?
Sure.
And if you have an experienced agent on the sell side, if you're a buyer's agent coming in and you know you have an experienced agent on the sell side that you can have a conversation and be like, this house is beautiful. It's in great condition. There's going to be no government issues here. You as a buyer's agent can kind of prep them for that and maybe be an equalizer and still say, hey, we'll repair those or we'll do that $2,000. So, all right. So great equalizer. I love that. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that I've been seeing on a lot of offers. So we have financing types. Conventional is king. The cash, I guess, is king. They always say, but conventional is next. Government is a little bit worse. And the other thing I'll say is that there definitely is a stigma that government is less qualified, but you do have some people in government that are more qualified than they are on the conventional side, especially right now because everybody's getting pushed to conventional. You're having people that really should be government and they're strong government buyers, but they're weak conventional buyers getting conventional loans because that's the only thing that get them accepted. So it's kind of flipping really on end historically what has been the truth. It's flipping it upside down and saying, this isn't always the case anymore, but it's still the perception, and the seller's perception is the seller's reality, right? So, closing cost credits. Are we still negotiating those things?
A handful of times I have seen it still come through. So it's just, certainly something to consider if you would like as a buyer to ask the seller to pay for those closing costs. Just be prepared for your offer to likely hit the bottom of the pile. I mean, it's not something typical right now. And if you're competing with several other offers, chances are they're probably not asking for that. So it's something that maybe you should save up and wait a little bit longer before making your offer so you can pay your own.
I think one of the things that people don't understand too is that if I was, say, buying a house for $300,000 and I'm offering the seller over here $300,000 and you're offering them $310,000 with $10,000 back, most people think, oh, that's the same offer, right? Because the seller's still only getting their $300,000, right? But in your case, the house has to appraise for $310,000, right? And appraisals are a big deal right now. Back to appraisal gaps, insurance, all that stuff. Yeah. So, okay. So you are less competitive if you're asking for credits is what you're saying. Yes. What if a house has been sitting on the market for a little while, what's a little while? 5 days now?
Yes, exactly. I mean, anything from 30 to 60 days, I would say people are talking like, what's going on over there? Why is it still on the market? So those types of homes, yes. I mean, you may have a shot at getting your closing costs because if they're having trouble getting offers for whatever the reason might be, maybe they started out at too high of a price point, or, maybe there's certain things inside the house that need to be repaired. It's not very HGTV like the typical buyer is looking for right now. That might be to your advantage, and you may actually, gain that. So
if you're shopping with an FHA buyer who needs a credit for their closing costs, might you suggest to them to look for houses that have been on the market longer? Is that probably a strategy?
Yeah, or something that needs a little bit of work on the inside or on the exterior.
So part of making a strong offer is also knowing what you're offering on, which is a house that's aged on the market has different rules than a house that's listed 3 hours ago.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's a lot of information. I love it. I mean, it just highlights the importance of a buyer's agent, like a really good, strong buyer's agent who can walk you through this, because the average person is not going to know this stuff.
Right. There's a lot of details involved in the entire process. Every buyer is different. Every home is different. So it's really important to have someone who's experienced on your side, especially with particular areas, because, different neighborhoods are different. And so when, you're comparing different homes and I'm throwing out numbers to a buyer who's potentially wanting to put in an offer, I'm making certain adjustments based on, location and size and, other things. So it's really important that all those factors are considered and that you're talking with someone that knows their particular market.
That's awesome. All right. So if you want to get out there and you want to actually get an offer accepted, you're going to hit Heather up. Her contact information is here on the screen. If you're looking for some financing options, hit me up as well. Heather is in Western Mass. In Mass, there's awesome first-time homebuyer programs, move-up buyers, people who are downsizing, whatever. There's programs for all of them. So hit us up. Contact information is on the screen. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.